Thank you. Thank you for having me today. And I think I pressed the button too soon. I'll wait for Richie back there. Thanks for having me today. Really excited to be here and to talk to everyone. Like the other speakers just said, I think everyone, the first panel alone took all my main points. And plus, there's lunch coming up. So I think you'll just see me skip through these charts. I'm going to try to do it maybe in 30 instead of 45 minutes, and then leave time for question and answer, because I think we've seen through the program so far, that's the most value you can get. And I wanted to say thank you to the team that put this on, to the Strategic Risk and IRM for inviting me to another event to speak. This one, a lot different than the first one I did that was just strictly risk management. Thank you for Debbie, Victoria, and Helen for all their hard work putting this together. I've put together, like a lot of you have conferences, and you have to have a really good, detail-oriented and very patient staff to make that work. And then the venue, I'm just amazed. You know, in the United States, our engineering and technology buildings look like concrete bunkers with no windows. And this is like the Taj Mahal, the worship of engineering and technology. So for me, it's like a kid in a candy store. So thank you. Ready for the next chart, Richie? Maybe I pressed the button. I think I ruined the. Or did I push the button? No, that's the black button. Oh, we can skip that chart. This is a video to play. Okay, that was a video to play during a break with the Earth going by from the space station. So I think I covered that. So I'm going to start today talking about the science. Why is this important? It's important because we all work in this risk management field. We're working in the ESG field. And what I found in my life, if you can just get some basic fundamental principles, we call it sort of first principles of what really is going on, it really helps us communicate. Sort of jokingly, people always ask me, like, why did you become an engineer? You know, I do a lot of mentoring and things and speaking, and I say, half jokingly, half the truth is because I couldn't read and write as a child. But once I got to a certain level of education, I could get concepts and apply those concepts. And that's all engineering is. But if you really understand that concept, you can apply it to different problems. Also, when I worked at SpaceX, people all just want to know about Elon Musk, what's Elon like, and he's such a genius, and so on and so forth. Or they used to be more positive, I guess. But I started working there in 2013. But I don't know if he's a genius or not, but he is so talented at taking complexity and breaking it down and communicating something in a very simple way. And with analysts that would be experts in guidance and navigation or thermodynamics, he would challenge their results, and I'm like, oh. And more times than not, he was right, because he's a great engineer, but his training that was in physics. He has a master's in physics. There's no engineering degrees, but he just makes him a great engineer, a great systems engineer, because he's always going to the fundamental things. So I'm going to try to give you a little background. A lot of the stuff you guys know, but hopefully maybe in a different way that'll strike some chords with you guys. This number keeps changing. When I first started lecturing, it was 50 million tons, but we put about 160 million tons of man-made global warming gases in the atmosphere every year. And why is that a problem, right? And so a lot of people don't understand that. Here's a picture from space the astronauts took. I can't tell if it's a sunrise or sunset. In space, the sunrise and sunsets last about 2 seconds. So in a blink of an eye, it's really hard to get this picture. In a blink of an eye, you go from total sun into total darkness. So these are actually really hard to take. And the astronauts that are, every time they go to space for the first time, consistently, without exception, they come back, and when they talk about their experience in space, they go, I just couldn't believe how thin the atmosphere was. So if you look at the curvature of the Earth, you picture, and we go to school, we get those pictures of the troposphere and the stratosphere and all these kind of layers on there. That's the whole thing right there. And to give it, I've got a chart on the next page to help us understand it a little bit better. So let's start with this lower, I got a pointer here too. Let's start with this lower thing here. We can all walk 6 kilometers. If you live in London, you're probably doing that 2 or 3 times a day. 50% of the atmosphere is below 6 kilometers. That's amazing. You only have to go a little bit less than twice that. 75%, that's where we fly in airplanes, fly about 10 kilometers high. The top of the troposphere, you're only 15K. Everybody in this room can walk 15K. That's 90% of the atmosphere. and we arbitrarily say space is way up there at 100, way up there. And that's 99.9999. That's 4 nines. That's pretty much almost all the atmosphere, except for a few molecules up there. So the atmosphere is very finite, very thin. It's a thin atmosphere that hugs the Earth. And as Al Gore said when he opened his the COP27, we've been treating it like a sewer. We know not to do that with rivers. Well, it depends what country you're in. But we know not to do that with rivers. We know not to do it with lakes. The ocean, we're realizing, is finite as well. We're realizing we have the technology to be able to fish the ocean's drives. Just in Alaska, I spent the summer up there working on a fishing boat. And the climate change there is in the fish stocks and everything. So many things that are affecting their economy up there with fishing. It's amazing. So, anyways, the atmosphere is very, very thin. It hugs the Earth. It's not this infinite resource, as we know other things are. Just a couple slides on the physics here. Of course, the sun hits the Earth, right? Warms the Earth. Most of that warmth is absorbed by the Earth. And the thing we have to understand here that's key is, I pressed the wrong button. The Earth is 80% nitrogen, 20% oxygen, roughly. It's really like 78-21. But 1% trace gases. So the problem is after the Earth heats up, that heat is reflected, and it comes as, changes wavelength from the visible into the infrared wavelengths. And it gets trapped by these greenhouse gases. Most of the gases, like I'm saying, 99% oxygen, nitrogen. So that doesn't trap it. That's okay. It passes right through it, just like the radiation passed into the Earth. But just that tiny percent of those trace gases is what's causing our planet to warm. And of course, this is not just scale, by the way. If we look at the 4 rocky planets near the Earth, Mercury's going to show up in a minute. You look at the different atmospheres. Mars, close to no atmosphere. It's about 1% the density of the Earth. The Earth, this is like my Goldilocks chart. This has just the perfect amount of greenhouse gases that keep it warm, just warm enough, but not too warm. And of course, Venus is 96% carbon dioxide, and that is what runaway global warming looks like. And if you can look here at the next chart here, you can see the temperatures. And even though Mercury is closer to the sun, you see how Venus is 3 times the temperature. That's because, of course, these greenhouse gases. So we want to have greenhouse gases, otherwise we wouldn't have terrestrial life. That, along with the magnetosphere, allows us to have terrestrial life, and life crawled out of the ocean. So we have this protective greenhouse gases, which is great. So back to science, we know exactly what kind of gases there are in the atmosphere. We know where they come from, what sectors of the economy. We know even what countries. I heard from COP27 there's a nonprofit being started to really take even more detailed look and actually pinpoint how much carbon's coming from individual sources, individual carbon, coal plants and natural gas plants. Another thing to understand global warming is all this heat is really being trapped in the ocean. This is what we call a heat sink. So if you take a gas stove, you put a cast iron frying pan on it, right? It takes a while for that to heat up, right? The flame goes on and off, but the pan takes a while. You cook your food, take your food off, the pan takes a long time to go down. So this heat is all being trapped in the ocean, and that has yet to affect the climate, and it's slowly it's building up, and as we see, it's getting causing havoc across the planet. Back to the science, especially in America, it's very sensitive to talk about global warming, but we have over 1,000 satellites around the Earth that are looking at climate change in some way. Most of these are Earth observation satellites. We have 100 space science and observations, 20 on Earth science. And so we're looking not just at the weather, we're looking at the oceans, the sea level, the salinity, chlorophyll, ice, snow melt, everything, and many different layers of the atmosphere. So I was fortunate to participate in launching some of these satellites, either on the space shuttle or the Falcon 9 when I worked at SpaceX. And people always have different ideas of what NASA is, but NASA is actually a world leader in climate studies and earth science, and we have been for decades. And our job is to produce robust scientific data needed to understand climate change. Unfortunately, we're not decision makers or policy makers, but we share this information with the whole world and for free, and hopefully that'll influence decision makers. So this, you might recognize this similar chart from my cover sheet. This is a visualization of all the atmospheric currents and the jet stream around the planet. So I'll get into this a little bit, and then we'll get to some other topics. But to understand climate change, you have to start to understand, when the radiation from the sun hits the planet, right? It's going to obviously the tropics and the equator. We're ignoring simplified problem here. We're ignoring the tilt of the axis. We're ignoring the Coriolis effect of the atmosphere. But just a basic thermodynamics and the thermodynamic laws, it's going to be hotter at the equators than the poles, right? Easy to understand. So that naturally the temperature is going to want to even itself. Everything wants to go in equilibrium. Just like if you're in the cold winter and you've got your nice heated car and you open the door, what's going to happen? It's going to try to equalize, right? That heat's going to disperse right outside the door, or vice versa. If you're in the summer and you got your nice air-conditioned car and you open the door and your spouse is like, close the door, I'm going to melt. So these things are always trying to equalize, and that's what causes the atmospheric currents and everything, and along, again, with the Coriolis effect. But at a simple scale, that's what's going on, right? Everything wants to be in equilibrium in physics, right? In entropy and all these physical theories. So 1 degree increase in temperature at the equator ends up being 3 times the increase at the poles. And that makes sense because the temperature gradient is so high, it's trying to equalize there. Next topic I want to hear, a lot of people talk about the polar vortex. Like, what do I care about the polar vortex? Well, what is the polar vortex to start out with? So it's a low pressure system. Think of it as a big sort of hurricane or cyclone that goes around both poles in a circle. It's very, very high up there. It's 15 to 50 kilometers. That's way up in the stratosphere. And it just trucks around in a circle. And in the winter, it's cold and quite strong. And in the summer, it gets weak and it starts getting these wiggles going up and down and up and down. And that's natural. That's how we get weather. This is what drives weather. This is what should be happening. So the polar vortex way up here at the top of the stratosphere it drives the jet stream, which are down here closer to Earth. So the jet streams are way down at 18 to 14 kilometers. So as you get more heat trapped in the atmosphere, you get more and more wiggles and more unpredictable wiggles. So this is actually a natural thing, but when you get too much, crazy things happen, like the polar vortex splitting into 2 and 3, and I'll show some pictures of those, what those look like. So this is the polar vortex from 2018, animation of how that split in half, and it brings freezing cold weather way down. If you remember, it froze in Texas for like a week and a half. I lived there for about 30 years, and that has never happened yet. And Europe has been experiencing some of that. Here's in January 3rd, 2019, it actually split into 3, the polar vortex, and that caused havoc with the jet streams and everything. And here's the jet stream splitting up into chaos here. So the reason this is important to understand, because it drives, again, this is what drives our weather across the whole planet. And one of these times when the polar vortex split, we had temperatures of 28 Celsius at the North Pole in February. This is the middle of winter. So just unprecedented kind of things going on. And that's what brings these waves and big squiggles is what brings huge snowstorms to Italy, ice storms to Dublin, the huge heat waves you've been having in England and all over Northern Europe. And crazy things like we've seen, roads melting, the bitumen, we call it asphalt in America, weren't designed for these temperatures, right? And then you see these crazy pictures, and this is what happens if you drive over a melted bitumen road. This is from Australia. And then even airports here in London, here we are at this high latitude of 50-some degrees, had to be closed because the runway was melting. You couldn't land planes. So we've talked about it this morning, too. The infrastructure that we have is not designed, and as an engineer, engineers do not design our structures and infrastructures for the warming planet that we have. And I don't want to make a whole presentation about death and destruction pictures, but I think Pakistan is worth mentioning. It really got the attention of climatologists and everyone around the world, just because it's, to say it was catastrophe of biblical proportion would not be an overstatement. They normally have droughts and monsoons, but this monsoon was over 5 times the rainfall. Imagine, which put a third of the country underwater. Thousands of people died. Millions homes were either damaged or destroyed. Bridges, roads, livestock. And the reason that's so, we've mentioned it here before too. This morning, 40% of the population work in agriculture. So it's not just like, oh, I have a materialistic loss. No, you've lost your way to make money and recover into the future. That's why Pakistan's asking for so much international aid, because how do you recover when you've lost that much livestock, when you've lost that many crops? You can't just go back to work after the floods subside and just start back where you left off. And these are NASA images, satellite images of Pakistan in the center. And these are not natural color, these are enhanced color, but you can tell that's the before. This is August 4th. The floods were on the 20th, and then the satellite came whipping around that part of the Earth again and took a similar picture. Just unbelievable, just things you can see with your own naked eye. What's even worse is this was on the heels of deadly heat waves the year before, or the summer, the same summer, where Pakistan was already having wildfires, glacial outbursts, and that's what this picture is here in the lower right, of when the glaciers melt, they overflow their lakes and just come barreling down, and there's just horrible damage, and people actually died on this bridge when it collapsed, just being thrown out. And then the monster monsoon came shortly after that. So, one of the most vulnerable places on Earth. To summarize, hopefully I've tried to give you some visualizations and some pictures in your mind on how this all works. We have heat that's trapped by the way it's radiated and gets trapped by the greenhouse gases. What's happening is heat, well, it's trying to equalize, right? And there's so much heat, it's equalizing in ways we haven't seen and making these waves and squiggles go around. It's disturbing on a good day, or for millennium, the polar vortex and the jet stream drive weather, but now with the extra heat, it's driving us into uncharted territory with even more instability than a normal summer. So I had a mnemonic for here. I think I'm going to skip it in fact of time. Just out of curiosity, does anybody know who Louis Theroux is in that song Jiggle Jiggle? Oh, it went crazy. In America, and I looked up in the internet, I couldn't find any reference to it here. It just sounds like it's a U.S. thing. But so I think I'll skip this. But I came up with my own original world about the wiggles of the atmosphere. So I'll let you read that a little bit. But and we talked about politics. We talked about who the U.S. presidents are, and regardless of what color of the presidents, red party, green party, excuse me, we don't have a green party in America, red party, blue party, Democrats, Republicans, the DOD has seen climate change as a risk for decades, and they've been working on biofuels, and you talked about how do you plug your tank in? Well, but you could run your tank on biofuels that could be renewable, and they've been looking at that, but they look at this for what it is, which is a sort of existential threat, not just to America, but to all of civilization. So that, they've said for years, before things were happening, long before 2014 and the climate change, and long after. But they talk about water shortages, pandemics, which we've just been through one, refugee crises, resources, and disasters. What we're seeing more and more every year. I'll skip through a lot of these. I think you guys are such a savvy audience. We know that climate change is going to drastically affect our food supply, our water. We know where food grows in the world, who has a food surplus, who has a food shortage. And, food is...
Can you go back a slide, please? No, previous one.
Yeah.
Absolute belter, thank you.
Yeah. These are for sale on my website. No. These are for free. I've told Debbie.
Won't be old.
Yeah, no, actually, I don't. I told Debbie I'm sharing all these slides with whoever wants them. So, because most of them were not created by me. Some were by the Climate Reality Project and NASA and all these things. So food obviously is complex. I'm not going to go into all this, but the big drivers: drought, heat, fires, right, which we're seeing more of. Pests, we're seeing more of. Floods affect our food supply. Water, we have reduced supply happening in parallel with increased demand, and you can already see wars over fresh water, and you see sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of the civil wars are over water after droughts. And of course, as temperature rise, so does the demand for the water use. And it already affects about 40% of our population. In health, I don't want to go into a lot of details here. Health is very complex, but obviously it's driven by how much water you have, how much food you have, disease, air pollution, all this stuff. So climate change is a medical emergency is one quote. Another one that's pretty powerful is climate change is the biggest global health threat in the 21st century. So there's so many facets to this, and I think most of you in this room are well aware of that. So I sort of want to slow down a little bit. It's paralyzing. All these, every time I do research and go to the conferences and stuff. And where's the woman that went to the COP27? But it's amazing that it's overwhelming, this information that we have. We have so much data, and but how do we turn it? We're risk managers. We need to, just like an engineer, right? Engineers are flooded with test data and satellite data and telemetry, and we have to figure out how to make data into information. And then as risk managers, we have to take information and make it actionable for our clients, for ourselves, for our governments. And so that's the hard part, right? As we talked about this morning, and everybody here talked about the science, the economics, the society, political and moral and ethical questions, which climate change is forcing us into. And where I want to point out here is so important is even if we become carbon neutral today, the planet, because of the oceans, that heat sink, the planet is going to continue to warm. So it's already baked into our planet. Our future has already been told. So people talk a lot this morning about the 1.5 degrees. Even if we stop polluting today or stop putting greenhouse gases in, we're going to be in my opinion, well above that. And the problem is that the carbon dioxide can linger in the atmosphere for thousands of years. I met a gentleman that wrote a book that said we won't get back to pre-industrial CO2 levels until maybe 100,000 years for the rock and the oceans to reabsorb that. So we've sort of, the way I like to say it is we're fully committed to living in a lot higher atmosphere, and it's just a fact. Even if we talked about carbon sequestration, that certainly would help. Everything would help, and like the gentleman said, we should continue to work extremely hard on reducing our greenhouse gases, because it will make our futures even that much worse. But the truth is, besides the COVID year, CO2 continues to go up year after year. It's going to go up again by the time we finish estimating 2022. Now, maybe we're slowing that growth, but we're still going up. So I see no way that humans are going to stop that in any short term, in the next 50 or 100 years. So as risk managers, we deal with uncertainty and we deal with risks. We know what's going to happen. We're just not sure when exactly it's going to happen, how it might affect your exact location on the planet. But we've had the science for decades on what's going to happen. And what's at stake? So it's not going to be the end of the human species. It's not going to be the end of the planet Earth. It's about the biosphere. It's all these little organisms and plants and species living on the surface of this rocky, wet planet. And it's not about even preserving normalcy. There won't be any normalcy, if me and you know. It's about saving civilization, our way of life. We want to avoid food and water shortages, disease and war. And one of the points I like to make is that civilization is so fragile. The pandemic exposed that, right? I've also lived through 3 financial crises in my short time here on the planet. And it's just amazing how, we called it the subprime crisis, which was just a sneeze in America and rippled across the whole globe, erased trillions of dollars of wealth, and that shouldn't have happened. But it shows how fragile our financial systems and our civilization is. And we do our best, but it's not a smooth line, right? As history has taught us, civilization does not just go in one direction. And this is what I want to sort of put this into perspective. I'm a sort of big picture guy. I like to talk about the big picture. So if you just think about the Earth, 4.5 billion years old, we've only been around for 200,000 years, at least anybody that you might recognize. And these are quite early, handsome humans here. Civilization, we're so vain as humans. Civilization's only been around for 6,000 years. So people go, oh, well, this rock over here, this shows that it's 12,000. Okay, 12,000 years, whatever you want to say. We just learned how to domesticate animals and agriculture and form governments and things like that. The Industrial Revolution, for God's sake, was only 300 years ago. We've screwed this place up in 300 years. Carl Sagan's made this cosmic calendar popular, and I won't go into this, but this is if the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and this is a 365-day calendar. Humans showed up at 11:59 on December 31st, and with 15 seconds to go, started learning how to have written language and culture and dance, and then suddenly, in a blink of an eye, threw all this carbon in the air. And people always say, well, the Earth's had higher levels of CO2 than this, and they're absolutely right. But it's been pretty stable for the last million years. Humans didn't even exist till here, and then boom, the Industrial Revolution hit. So we have to keep this in perspective. It's not about the species of the planet. This is about civilization. And what does history tell us? History tells us that the climate's been stable for 12,000 years, and this has allowed us to do these things like writing and poetry and dance and jiggle jiggle songs from Louis Theroux. And NASA observations, along with archaeologists and climate change specialists, have sort of discovered some lessons from the past. So here's, actually I was just in Morocco, which is nowhere near Oman, but Morocco does have a lot of deserts. So there was a rumor or a legend of the lost city of Ubar. And it was actually in the 80s, the last space shuttle mission of the Challenger, the doomed Challenger space shuttle. They took some special radar equipment up there, and working with archaeologists and other people, they actually found the lost city of Ubar. So when we found out exactly what happened to this poor city of Ubar, it's now in Oman. As you would expect, if you're in the desert and you're a nomad and you find water, you're going to stay there. So they formed the city right over this nice aquifer. And unfortunately, it was a limestone aquifer. So after the hundreds of years of drawing the water out there, the whole city collapsed into a giant sinkhole about 3000 BC. And you can go there and visit it, and you can actually find it on Google Maps. You can just say Ubar, and it comes up. And you'll see the big holes there. The Egyptian civilization, the Old Kingdom, Egypt had 3 different kingdoms. So this is the very first Egyptian kingdom that built the pyramids and the Sphinx. That ended at 2130 BC, about 4,000 years ago, from a mega drought. The Mayans, they ended about 900 AD before Europeans came over there. From a drought and from over usage. And this one sort of rings even closer to today's society. Angkor, in a very exact date, 1431, had severe droughts followed by intense flooding. And these words are like true today for so many cities and things that have happened. The city's water management couldn't cope with intense flooding. Its infrastructure suffered intense damage. Sounds familiar, like not just Pakistan, but all over America. So history tells us what's going to happen if we ignore the environment. So where does this leave us, right? And my theme for today is we must adopt. We don't really have a choice. There's no going back. There's no going back to the normalcy of our childhood or our prior generations. Where are we going to live? Where are we going to grow food? Where do we locate our business? And I think the hard part is what part of civilizations do we want to save? You know, I mean, they're putting all the dams up around Venice, trying to save Venice and those kind of things, but can we really save Miami Beach? Can we really save New York? I don't know. And what does it cost? The Biden administration is actually trying to quantify it, which is nice. They have a lot of things yet to quantify, but as we've talked this morning, too, people are trying to figure out how much this is going to cost. And these are just sort of wild numbers, like you've said, like everybody said this morning. We have no idea, but we think it could cost us $23 billion by 2050. Oxford says it could go into green energy, could save the world $12 trillion by 2050. It's really hard to say. I heard from COP27, $4.5 trillion per year to transition. So we really don't know, but we do know we have to adopt. I'll skip these charts. These are just how much it would cost per city in some of the big cities. So I have a proposal for us. I'm almost on time. I say as a risk community, let's mitigate these risks, right? Let's start figuring out how we're going to adapt to this planet, right? Let's use our paradigm. What can go wrong? How likely is it? What are the associated consequences? And I think we know all these things. I think we should try to save civilization. I'd like my iPhone. I like watching Netflix. I listen to the BBC. There's got a lot of good things, right? We know what these risks are. I won't read these, but I think in this room is pretty savvy. We know what the risks are. And I think we should stop doing the research. Not stop. We should de-emphasize the research, de-emphasize all these risk assessments, and start actually doing the risk management. And the risk management is the step where you actually have to take action, right? It's where we actually say, what should I do today? What you recommend to your clients. It may be what you do in your family, in your backyard. Maybe you learn how to plant food. We don't know. And risk management is always about uncertainty, right? If there wasn't uncertainty in a problem, you wouldn't have risk managers because we knew something was going to happen. You wouldn't have to hire a risk manager or do risk management if we knew it wasn't going to happen, right? So we just don't know when things are going to happen and exactly how they're going to unfold. We know at a macro level, and we have for decades, what's going on. So, we think we know what to do, but, and some people are like, hey, as a species, we've been through 2 ice ages, and we can do this. But those were cooling planets. We've never really adapted to a warming planet, right? And they talk about the loss of species. Hopefully the humans won't be one of those. But today, the bright side, we have so much more tools, so much data, so much science, so much technology. It's going to really be a test for the human species. And as we said this morning, too, I'm again reiterating everyone's points. Do we have the collective will? So I thought some great photos here. I live in Washington State now the last 3 years. Should we just keep playing golf? As the world burns. This is a real photograph, by the way. Here's another one, in Colorado. And I'm guilty of this, too. I was in Canada. I did a mountain bike ride, and I saw this big billow of smoke a couple miles away. I'm like, well, I'm not on my trail right now, so keep going. And then this is one of my favorite ones from York. And she's cleaning the windows, waiting for the customers to come in. I don't know what these windows must be made out of, 2-inch glass or something. So I don't want to be, derogatory towards the British culture, and maybe it's time we don't just keep calm and carry on. This is the time for action, not for keeping calm and carrying on. And we've touched on this again. You guys all stole my points. 20% of the world is democracies, but are they functional democracies? 70% is authoritarian. I guess 10% we don't know what they are. And then thank God this last week we had our midterm elections, and it looks like the U.S. for at least 2 more years will stay in this general vicinity. But somebody already said the next election and mentioned Ron DeSantis. So we'll see. We'll see if we become the way of North Korea. And then in America, I don't know what it's like in Europe, but we can't even talk about it. I can't talk about climate change with my coworkers or my family. It's just it's like, oh, you're one of those. You're a liberal. You're a blah, blah, blah. And I go, no, I'm an engineer. I believe in science. And science is agnostic to whether you care about science or whether you believe in science, right? And so this is really embarrassing. 40 the 50 states in middle school, that's 10 years old to 13 years old, have like barely a mention of climate change, like one little sentence in a thing, because it's all controlled by local school board members. And Florida is not allowed to include it at all in their curriculum. And so teachers are sort of sitting there like, what am I supposed to do now? You know, so those are the most formidable ages of children, right? From those ages when you're dealing with your identity and what you're good at, what you're bad at, what you like, what you don't like. So the mitigations, I always use this analogy. Today wasn't that presentation, but we live on this thing called the spaceship Earth. It's hurling around the sun at thousands of kilometers per hour, tens of thousands, and then it's hurling around the center of the Milky Way galaxy at hundreds of thousands of kilometers per hour. So there's really no place to go. People literally many times, oh, you work at SpaceX? Oh, I'm so glad Elon's going to Mars. You know, Elon wants 1 million people living on Mars. Well, this is not really a good mitigation for climate change. Mars has no atmosphere. Most importantly, it has no magnetosphere, so the cosmic radiation would kill any terrestrial life. So if you watch some of the National Geographic specials on Mars, they're living in lava tubes underground, and God knows where you're getting the water. There is water on Mars, but it's locked into the soil. So it would take, you know, nuclear power plants there to rip all this moisture out of the soil. So this is not a good backup plan for just continuing to civilization in the course that we're taking now. We need to build resilient cities. I used to work at NASA for this guy. You might recognize him from Apollo 13, who's played by, I forgot the actor's name now, if you want to help me out. And my other favorite movie, The Martian. When I worked at SpaceX, we were so excited about that. Elon rented like 12 theaters. We all got free showing of The Martian. This was written by, it was free. It was a NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. NASA engineer wrote this stuff for free, just put it on PDFs and gave it away for free on the internet. And then it became such a phenomenon. He published a book and made a movie. And he's really an introvert. He hates going to conferences and talking, and my friend had dinner with him, and he sat there and go, I hate this, what time to kind of leave, you know. But he accidentally did this great book, but what I like both these movies about is it shows you how you solve problems, right? You break it down. Look, climate change is incomprehensible to the human mind, all the facets of it, but just take one bite at a time, break into teams, solve one problem at a time, and move on to the next. So the fictitious character, Mark Watney, said, you know, at some point everything's going to go south. You can either accept it or you can get to work. So, you know, one of our largest challenges, right, I talked about the willpower, right? We need leadership, but we also need me and you and everyone else on board on this. And you can lead through grassroots, you can lead locally, you can lead at your city council. We don't have to be the president of our countries to lead. And we have to use specific data to our locations. We have this data now. We know just about what's going on in every part of the world. I like to say that, you know, Venice is not Vancouver, is not Vanuatu, which is a small Pacific country in the West. Think globally, act locally comes to mind. You know, what's going on in your client, in your town, your business, your home, your island, community, your family. So, in summary, we need all hands on deck to address climate change. It's such a complex, multifaceted risk. It can be overwhelming. We need to sort of be that change we want to see in the world. Voting's important, especially in America, where 26% of the people vote, and that's a huge turnout. We need to model behaviors, and everything we know and love is at stake for this. You know, good news, we're sort of waiting to see what's going to happen. Like we said, out of COP27, maybe Saturday they'll make some announcements. But recently there's some good news. You know, Brazil chose to save the Amazon. That government, you know, and we also said the problem with, like somebody mentioned today, the problem with democracies is maybe they'll turn that around, you know, next election. Australia, which I used to go to a whole lot, 20 years ago was the greenest place in the world, but now it took them 20 years to get back to a green-friendly, and they're trying to be government, and they're trying to be net zero. The U.S., believe it or not, we've the last year, all the electricity capacity that we added, 81% was renewable. So that's encouraging. So, you know, not only do we have to make our civilizations resilient, and put all this information to work, we need to put our passions to work. So we need to put our energy and more of our human spirit into this stuff. Yes, we need to continue to decrease carbon, but we also have to start adapting immediately. So as risk managers, I think we should all sort of apply that passion, right? We should go back, put on your suit, maybe even a cape if you need to, whatever helps, or a cape over your suit. And we need to get to work, let's charge ahead and start solving this problem. And as a fellow jazz musician, Joan Baez from Brazil, said a nice short quote, action is the antidote to despair. So I don't think we should sit around and despair. I think we should all get to work. So thank you very much. So is it lunch, or should we do questions?
It is. I think it's lunch.
Okay, good.
But thank you so much indeed for such an inspiring presentation. We are going to break for lunch now, which is down in the Maxwell Library. Could I ask you to be back here in an hour at 2:15, please? Enjoy your lunch. Thank you.